From shadows to spotlight, the reckoning, after losing a promotion to family favoritism. I still remember the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead when the announcement came. The conference room felt smaller than usual, packed with my colleagues who'd gathered for what we thought was a routine meeting. My palms were sweaty as I sat there, knowing this was the moment I'd worked toward for 3 years. The regional manager position was finally being filled, and everyone knew I was the obvious choice. Then CEO Harrison Blake cleared his throat and smiled. "I'm thrilled to announce our new regional manager," he said, pausing dramatically. "Frank Morrison will be taking the helm starting Monday." The room erupted in polite applause, but my world went silent. Frank? Frank Morrison, who'd been here 18 months and spent most meetings on his phone? I watched him stand up, grinning like he'd won the lottery. My stomach dropped as I realized the truth. Frank wasn't just some lucky hire. He was Harrison's nephew. I forced a smile and clapped along, but inside, something cracked. 3 years of 60-hour weeks, of solving problems Frank couldn't even identify, of building relationships with clients who specifically requested me. All of it meant nothing against blood ties. After the meeting, I lingered in the hallway, watching Frank accept congratulations from colleagues who looked as confused as I felt. When the crowd dispersed, I knocked on Harrison's office door. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped inside. "Harrison," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to understand the decision-making process for Frank's promotion." He didn't even look up from his computer. "Frank brings fresh perspective and innovative ideas," he said dismissively. "Sometimes we need new blood to shake things up." Fresh perspective? The man who'd asked me last week how to send a calendar invite? I bit back my response and tried again. "With respect, I've consistently exceeded targets and have the client relationships too." "The decision's been made, Alex," Harrison interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. "I suggest you focus on supporting Frank's transition instead of questioning my judgment." I left his office feeling smaller than I'd ever felt. The message was crystal clear. Family trumped everything, including competence. That evening, I sat at my parents' dinner table, pushing food around my plate, while my family tried to process what had happened. My mother's face showed that familiar mixture of sympathy and disappointment I'd seen too many times growing up. "Maybe this is just a learning experience," Dad said, cutting his steak with unnecessary force. "Sometimes these things work out for the best in the long run." My sister Emma looked up from her phone. "Can't you just try harder next time? Maybe Frank saw something you didn't." Try harder? I'd given everything to that company. I'd missed family gatherings, skipped vacations, and worked weekends to prove myself worthy. Now my own family was suggesting I hadn't done enough. "It's not about trying harder," I said quietly. "It's about Frank being Harrison's nephew." The table went silent. Dad cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, that's just how business works sometimes, son." I excused myself early that night, feeling more alone than ever. Even my family couldn't see the injustice staring them in the face. Monday morning brought a new reality. Frank strutted around the office like he owned the place, rearranging desks and scheduling unnecessary meetings. I watched colleagues navigate around him with forced smiles and polite nods, but the whispers started almost immediately. "Did you see how he handled the Peterson account?" Mia whispered to Ben near the coffee machine. "Alex would never have made that mistake." "Shh," Ben replied, glancing around nervously. "You know Alex is probably bitter about the whole thing." Bitter? Is that what they thought? I wasn't bitter, I was furious. But apparently, having standards and expecting fairness made me the office pariah. Throughout the day, I caught colleagues shooting me sympathetic looks, followed by quick glances away. They felt sorry for me, but nobody wanted to risk their own position by speaking up. By lunch, the narrative had solidified. Alex was the disappointed employee who couldn't handle losing. Frank was the exciting new leader bringing change. The truth about nepotism became an uncomfortable secret everyone agreed to ignore. That night, I sat in my apartment with a legal pad, mapping out everything that had led to this moment. If Harrison wanted to play family politics, I'd play a different game entirely. I started documenting every instance of Frank's incompetence, every missed deadline, every client complaint that had been quietly swept under the rug. I opened my laptop and began creating files Frank's mistakes, client feedback, performance metrics. For every problem Frank created, I had a solution I'd quietly implemented. For every credit he'd taken, I had emails proving my actual contribution. The plan wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. I'd spent years building my reputation and expertise. Frank's promotion might have been handed to him, but keeping it would require actual competence. And competence, I was learning, wasn't hereditary. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my contacts. If Harrison wouldn't listen to reason, maybe I needed to find people who would. The next morning, I arrived early and found Mia and Ben already at their desks, looking frustrated. Frank had apparently sent them a rambling email at midnight, completely misunderstanding a client's requirements and demanding they start over on a project they'd nearly finished. "This is insane," Mia muttered, showing me her screen. "Look at this mess." Ben shook his head. "I've been here 4 years, and I've never seen anything like this. He doesn't understand basic project management." I glanced around to make sure Frank wasn't nearby, then leaned in. "Want to grab coffee after work? I think we need to talk." That evening, we sat in a quiet cafe downtown while I laid out what I'd been documenting. Mia's eyes widened as I showed her the pattern of Frank's mistakes and the cover-ups that followed. Ben whistled low when he saw the client complaints. "This is worse than I thought," Mia said. "But what can we do? Harrison's not going to fire his own nephew." "Maybe not," I replied. "But there are other people who care about this company's success. People who don't share Harrison's blind spots." Frank's first major presentation came 2 weeks later. The client was Peterson Industries, our biggest account, and Frank had insisted on handling it personally despite my offers to help. I watched from the back of the room as he stumbled through slides I'd originally created, mangling key details and misunderstanding basic client needs. Mr. Peterson's face grew increasingly confused as Frank explained a solution that would actually create more problems than it solved. When Peterson asked specific technical questions, Frank fumbled for answers, eventually turning to me with a desperate look. "Alex, you've worked on similar projects. Want to jump in?" I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room on me. For the next 20 minutes, I salvaged what I could of Frank's disaster, answering Peterson's questions and proposing actual solutions. By the end, Peterson was nodding approvingly, but his trust in our company's leadership had clearly taken a hit. After Peterson left, Frank clapped me on the back. "Great teamwork," he said loudly. "This is exactly the kind of collaboration I want to foster." Collaboration? He'd nearly lost our biggest client through sheer incompetence. That weekend, I sat down to write what I called an anonymous performance evaluation. Using a burner email account, I compiled Frank's mistakes into a professional report, complete with client feedback and performance metrics. I didn't attack him personally. I simply presented facts. The report highlighted missed deadlines, client complaints, and the growing disconnect between Frank's promises and his team's ability to deliver. I included testimonials from colleagues who'd expressed frustration privately, though I kept their names confidential. Monday morning, I sent the report to the board of directors, the HR department, and several senior managers. The subject line read, "Concerns regarding recent management changes and their impact on client relations." By noon, the office was buzzing with tension. Harrison had called an emergency meeting with HR, and Frank looked visibly shaken. Word spread quickly that someone had filed a formal complaint about management practices. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I felt a spark of hope. Finally, someone with authority would have to examine Frank's actual performance instead of just accepting Harrison's family bias. Frank's paranoia kicked into overdrive. He started hovering around people's desks, asking pointed questions about loyalty and team spirit. During our weekly team meeting, he made a passive-aggressive speech about maintaining positive attitudes and supporting new leadership. "I know change can be difficult," he said, his eyes scanning the room before landing on me. "But I expect everyone to embrace our new direction instead of dwelling on the past." The message was clear. Fall in line or face consequences. But Frank had underestimated how much his mistakes had already damaged team morale. Mia rolled her eyes when he wasn't looking. Ben typed furiously on his laptop, probably updating his resume. After the meeting, I lingered to clean up the conference room. Frank approached me with what he probably thought was a friendly smile. "Alex, I hope you know there are no hard feelings about the promotion," he said. "I'm counting on your experience to help me succeed." I looked at him for a long moment. "Of course, Frank. I'm always happy to help competent leadership." The emphasis on competent wasn't lost on him. His smile faltered slightly before he walked away. While organizing files for a client presentation, I stumbled across something that made my blood run cold. Frank had been forwarding confidential client information to his personal email account. Information that included pricing strategies and competitive analysis that could be incredibly damaging if it fell into the wrong hands. I sat staring at the email trail, my heart racing. This wasn't just incompetence anymore. This was a potential security breach that could violate our contracts with multiple clients. Whether Frank was doing it maliciously or just through ignorance didn't matter. The damage could be catastrophic. I immediately saved screenshots and forwarded the evidence to my personal account. Then I called our IT department and reported a potential security concern, providing them with enough information to investigate without revealing my source. Within hours, IT had flagged Frank's email activity and escalated the issue to Harrison. I watched through my office window as Harrison marched into Frank's office, his face red with anger. This was bigger than a family dispute now. This was about the company's survival. Mia pulled me aside the next morning with news that changed everything. "My friend in HR told me something interesting," she whispered. "Apparently, there's been a formal complaint filed about Frank's performance, and the board is taking it seriously." My heart jumped, but I kept my expression neutral. "Really? What kind of complaint?" "The whole thing. Missed deadlines, client complaints, that disaster with Peterson Industries. Someone documented everything." She paused, studying my face. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" I shrugged. "I'm just focused on doing my job well." But Mia wasn't fooled. She leaned closer. "Look, Alex, if you're planning something, I want in. Frank's been making my life miserable, and I'm tired of pretending everything's fine." That afternoon, she introduced me to her contact in HR, a woman named Patricia who'd been watching Frank's performance with growing concern. Patricia couldn't give us details about the investigation, but she could confirm that the board was asking serious questions about recent management decisions. "Keep documenting everything," Patricia advised quietly. "The more evidence we have, the stronger the case becomes." I spent the weekend compiling a comprehensive report on Frank's security breach. Using public records and client contracts, I outlined exactly how his careless handling of confidential information could expose the company to lawsuits and regulatory penalties. Monday morning, I hand-delivered the report to the board's chairman, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss what I'd discovered. By afternoon, I was sitting in the boardroom with 3 senior directors, walking them through Frank's email trail and explaining the potential legal ramifications. "This is extremely serious," the chairman said, studying the documents. "How did you discover this?" "I was preparing client files and noticed the unusual email activity," I replied truthfully. I felt obligated to report it immediately. The directors exchanged grim looks. One of them asked, "In your professional opinion, was this intentional or negligence?" "I can't speak to intent," I said carefully. "But I can tell you that anyone in a management position should understand the sensitivity of this information." They thanked me for bringing the matter to their attention and asked me to keep the conversation confidential while they investigated. As I left the boardroom, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and anxiety. The wheels of justice were finally turning. Harrison called an emergency all-hands meeting the next morning. His face was ashen as he announced that the company would be implementing new security protocols and conducting a comprehensive review of information handling practices. "We take client confidentiality extremely seriously," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Any employee found to be in violation of our security policies will face immediate disciplinary action." Frank sat in the front row, visibly sweating. He kept glancing back at me, as if trying to gauge whether I knew something. I maintained a neutral expression, but inside I was celebrating. The investigation was moving forward. and Frank's reckless behavior was finally being scrutinized. After the meeting, colleagues buzzed with speculation. Word had leaked that someone in management was under investigation for security violations. Frank tried to act normal, but his nervous energy was obvious to everyone. Mia caught my eye across the room and gave me a subtle thumbs up. Ben nodded approvingly. Even colleagues who'd previously supported Frank were starting to distance themselves. The tide was finally turning. Frank's desperation became obvious when he started spreading rumors about my attitude problem and inability to accept change. He pulled individual team members into private conversations, fishing for complaints about my work or suggestions that I was undermining his authority. Alex seems to be struggling with the new management structure, he told Patricia from HR, not knowing about her connection to me. I'm concerned about his impact on team morale. But Frank's campaign backfired spectacularly. Instead of finding allies, he encountered colleagues who respected my work and resented his obvious attempt at character assassination. Several people came to me directly, warning me about Frank's efforts and offering their support. He asked me to write down any complaints I had about working with you, Ben told me privately. I told him I didn't have any. You're one of the most professional people here. Mia was more direct. Frank's acting like a cornered animal. He knows something's coming. That evening, I received an email from Patricia. Frank submitted a formal complaint about your performance. HR will need to interview you as part of the process. Don't worry, we're documenting everything. I smiled as I typed my response. I look forward to the opportunity to address any concerns. The HR interview was scheduled for Friday morning. I spent Thursday evening preparing my defense, gathering emails, client testimonials, and performance reviews that demonstrated my value to the company. If Frank wanted to play dirty, I was ready. But when Friday arrived, something unexpected happened. Mia and Ben both called in sick, claiming they couldn't handle the stress of the office drama anymore. 2 other colleagues submitted transfer requests to different departments. Frank's toxic leadership was driving away talented people, and management was starting to notice. During my HR interview, I presented a calm, professional defense of my work, while subtly highlighting the pattern of departures since Frank's promotion. I didn't attack Frank directly, I simply let the facts speak for themselves. The team dynamics have certainly changed, I acknowledged when asked about recent tensions. I think everyone's trying to adapt to new leadership styles. Patricia took detailed notes, asking specific questions about team morale and client relationships. By the end of the interview, I felt confident that the truth was emerging, despite Frank's attempts at misdirection. As I left the HR office, I passed Frank in the hallway. His confident smirk had been replaced by obvious anxiety. That weekend, I made a decision that would change everything. I reached out to former colleagues who'd left the company over the past year, asking if they'd be willing to share their experiences with workplace culture and management practices. The response was overwhelming. 5 former employees agreed to speak with me, and their stories painted a disturbing picture of favoritism, incompetence, and toxic leadership that went beyond just Frank. They described a pattern of qualified candidates being passed over for promotions in favor of less qualified insider candidates. I compiled their testimonials into a comprehensive report titled Systemic Issues in Management Practices and Employee Retention. Using social media and professional networks, I began sharing the report with industry contacts, former clients, and anyone who might have influence over the company's reputation. Within days, the report was circulating widely in our industry. Trade publications picked up the story, and our company's name began appearing in articles about nepotism and workplace fairness. Harrison's phone started ringing with concerned calls from clients and business partners. The family favoritism that had seemed like a minor internal issue was becoming a public relations nightmare. Monday morning brought chaos. Harrison had called an emergency board meeting, and rumors were flying that major changes were coming. Frank looked haggard, clearly aware that his position was in jeopardy. The board's chairman approached me directly, asking if I'd be available for a confidential conversation about recent events. We met in a small conference room where he laid out the situation plainly. The security investigation confirmed serious violations, he said. The performance complaints have been substantiated, and now we're dealing with negative publicity that's affecting our business relationships. He paused, studying my face. The board is prepared to make significant changes to restore confidence in our leadership. Would you be interested in discussing your role in the company's future? My heart raced, but I kept my voice steady. I'm committed to this company's success, I replied. I'd be honored to discuss how I can contribute. Good, he said, standing up. We'll be making announcements soon. I wanted you to hear directly from me that your loyalty and professionalism haven't gone unnoticed. As he left, I sat alone in the conference room, hardly believing what had just happened. Frank's final desperate move came Tuesday afternoon. He'd apparently spent the night creating fake emails that made it appear I'd been sharing confidential information with competitors. The forgeries were clumsy. Wrong timestamps, inconsistent formatting, obvious digital manipulation. But Frank was beyond caring about subtlety. He marched into Harrison's office with his evidence, demanding my immediate termination for corporate espionage. He even threatened to go to the police if the company didn't take action. Unfortunately for Frank, our IT department had been monitoring all email activity since the security breach investigation began. Within an hour, they'd traced the fake emails back to Frank's computer and identified the software he'd used to create them. The irony was perfect. In trying to frame me for the exact crime he'd committed, Frank had provided conclusive evidence of his own guilt and desperation. Harrison emerged from his office looking like he'd aged 10 years. The nephew he'd protected and promoted had just committed fraud in an attempt to destroy an innocent employee. There was no coming back from this. I was in my office when IT called to inform me about Frank's forgery attempt. They needed me to verify that the fake emails weren't legitimate communications, and they walked me through the evidence of digital manipulation. We've never seen anything this blatant, the IT director told me. He didn't even try to make it convincing. The metadata shows the files were created yesterday, but they're supposedly from 6 months ago. I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Frank had destroyed himself through his own desperation and incompetence. The nephew who'd stolen my promotion had become so paranoid about losing it that he'd committed multiple fireable offenses. That afternoon, I received a call from a journalist who'd been following the story of workplace favoritism in our industry. She wanted to interview me about my experiences and the recent developments at our company. This has become a case study in how nepotism can destroy organizations, she said. Would you be willing to share your perspective on the record? I agreed to meet her the following day. It was time for the full truth to come out. The interview took place in a quiet restaurant downtown. I told my story carefully and honestly. The missed promotion, the documented incompetence, the security breaches, and finally, the attempted frame-up. The journalist took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions about systemic workplace issues. What you've described isn't just about one bad promotion, she observed. It's about how family connections can corrupt entire organizations and drive away talented people. She'd already spoken with several of my former colleagues and had obtained copies of the security investigation findings through public records requests. The article would be comprehensive and well documented. When will this be published? I asked. Tomorrow morning, she replied. Are you prepared for the attention this might bring? I thought about 3 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and ultimately betrayed. I thought about Frank's smug smile when he'd accepted my promotion and his desperate attempts to destroy me when his incompetence caught up with him. I'm ready, I said. The article hit like a bomb. How nepotism nearly destroyed a mid-sized company, an inside look at family favoritism gone wrong, appeared on the front page of the business section and was immediately picked up by online publications. The story detailed everything. Frank's unqualified promotion, his series of mistakes and security violations, and his final desperate attempt to frame an innocent colleague. It included quotes from former employees, excerpts from the security investigation, and expert commentary on the dangers of workplace nepotism. My phone started ringing before 8 a.m. Colleagues, former classmates, and industry contacts all wanted to discuss the article. Several offered job opportunities, impressed by how I'd handled an impossible situation with professionalism and integrity. But the most satisfying call came from Harrison himself. His voice was strained as he asked if I could come in for an urgent meeting with the board of directors. "Alex," he said quietly, "we need to talk." The boardroom was packed when I arrived. All 5 directors were present, along with Harrison and the company's legal counsel. Frank was notably absent. The chairman spoke first. "Alex, we owe you an apology. The investigation has revealed serious management failures that should never have occurred." Harrison looked broken as he addressed me directly. "I let family loyalty cloud my judgment. Frank's promotion was a mistake that cost this company dearly. His subsequent actions were unconscionable." The legal counsel outlined Frank's termination for security violations and attempted fraud. They also announced that Harrison would be stepping down as CEO, accepting responsibility for the crisis his nepotism had created. Then came the offer I'd dreamed of: regional manager, with expanded responsibilities and a significant salary increase. But more importantly, they wanted to implement new policies to ensure merit-based promotions and prevent future favoritism. "We'd like you to help design those policies," the chairman said. "Your experience gives you unique insight into what needs to change." I accepted the position, but with conditions: transparent promotion criteria, independent oversight of management decisions, and a commitment to rebuilding the company culture. Frank's last day was awkward for everyone. He cleaned out his office in silence while former colleagues pretended to be busy. The man who'd strutted around like he owned the place just weeks ago now couldn't make eye contact with anyone. As he carried his box of personal items past my office, he stopped and looked in. For a moment, I thought he might apologize or at least acknowledge what had happened. Instead, he just shook his head and walked away. I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. Frank had been a victim of the same system that had wronged me. A system that valued connections over competence and enabled people to fail upward until they finally crashed. The real victory wasn't Frank's termination. It was the changes we were implementing to prevent future Franks from being promoted beyond their abilities. That evening, I stayed late to begin reviewing resumes for Frank's replacement. This time, the process would be fair, transparent, and based solely on qualifications. My first major decision as regional manager was to rehire 2 of the talented colleagues who'd left during Frank's tenure. Mia and Ben were thrilled to return to a healthier work environment, and their experience during the crisis made them valuable allies in rebuilding team morale. We implemented new client relationship protocols, fixed the security vulnerabilities Frank had created, and began repairing the damage to our reputation. The Peterson Industries account, which had been on the verge of leaving, renewed their contract after seeing our commitment to real change. 6 months later, our department's performance metrics were the best in company history. Client satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and we hadn't lost a single qualified employee to resignation. The board asked me to present our turnaround strategy to other departments, and several companies reached out for consulting on preventing nepotism and building merit-based cultures. I'd gone from being the overlooked employee to being recognized as a leader in organizational reform. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that future employees wouldn't have to endure what I'd experienced. A year later, I stood in the same conference room where Frank's promotion had been announced. This time, I was presenting our annual results to a packed room of colleagues who'd chosen to stay and new hires who'd joined our transformed culture. The numbers spoke for themselves: record client retention, improved employee satisfaction, and recognition as one of the region's best places to work. We'd become a case study in how to recover from leadership failures and build something better. After the presentation, I walked past Harrison's old office, now occupied by our new CEO, a qualified leader chosen through a rigorous search process. The changes we'd implemented were working, creating opportunities for advancement based on merit rather than family connections. My phone buzzed with a text from the journalist who'd broken the original story. "Saw your company's award for workplace excellence. Amazing turnaround. Interested in a follow-up article?" I smiled and typed back, "Let's talk." As I headed home that evening, I reflected on the journey from that devastating promotion announcement to this moment of triumph. I'd learned that justice doesn't always come quickly or easily, but persistence and integrity eventually prevail. Frank had taught me an unexpected lesson. Sometimes the greatest favor your enemies can do is underestimate you completely. His arrogance and incompetence had created the very opportunities I needed to prove my worth and transform our organization. The shadows I'd been forced into had become my spotlight, not through revenge, but through resilience.